Okay. All right, there we go. Let's try this again. Okay. So as I was saying, last Monday we were talking about silence and the purpose behind it, and we brought about the idea that in our modern culture, especially, we don't take time to actually allow people in conversation to really think and process the information that is going on. And I mentioned that, for example, in the average class, whether it's K through 12 or college, the average instructor waits about 2.5 to 5 seconds after asking a question before they continue on and provide the answer anyways. And the issue is that unless the answer is right at the tip of a person's tongue, which sometimes it is, it actually takes us about 4 to 5 seconds to process a question, and then another 4 or 5 questions to actually generate a thought or generate an answer to it. And I mentioned last Monday, that's why if you think about a lot of very intense conversations, the next couple of days you might spend thinking about, oh, I should have said this, or I should have said that, or it might have went better if I would have done that. Per reason being behind that is we don't allow ourselves time to really think about questions that are being asked before we generate a response. And the person generating the response feels that pressure to need to respond. Okay. And so what we want to do in the counseling set in the counseling setting, especially when we're dealing with groups, is we want people that get comfortable with silence. We want them to be encouraged to think about and process the information that is being presented to them and the questions that are being asked about them. So, and again, so we're going to start here with the benefits to the counselor is it reinforces that person-centered value that we've been talking about through the semester. It encourages the client to explore themselves and really come to an understanding of this is what I think is happening to me. Because again, one of the tempting things to do is to fill in those blanks for clients, to recommend what they might be thinking or feeling. And a lot of times it's because of our own anxiety about silence occurring, and maybe they don't understand the question or they don't uh, get what we're trying to ask in the first place. So, and it does come apart because if you think about our modern counseling session, is that they're coming to an expert and they expect you to have the answers, okay, and the advice. But perhaps it's accompanied by warm and accepting smiles, okay? Um, and again, this when you use silence appropriately for especially a client, it is actually showing your own growth to the client that you're okay with being here and being in this situation with them instead of you feeling stressed to try and fill in the blanks for them. And it links us to that that unconditional positive regard that we talked about with Rogers earlier in the semesters, is that it helped gain that trust of the client that you're just not there to push them along or herd them along through the therapeutic process. Other benefits, it gives client autonomy within the session. It allows them to have ownership instead of the counselor. And it can lead the client to ask important questions and fill in gaps that they may not understand. And so it encourages them to take control or take some autonomy within the session and some ownership, which really goes back to that relationship that we're trying to build. And if you think about this again in the guise of the group setting, what you're teaching your clients is to get comfortable with people having their own thoughts and their own feelings and not feeling pressured to give an opinion or give an idea, that allowing others to think and process information is healthy. So again, going along, it enables the counselor to process. Okay, this is where you get to have time to collect your own thoughts and your own feelings about what's going on. It's a time for you to sit back and saying, am I in this situation in a biased stance? Am I here not thinking in the right direction? Are we doing some type of progress? Okay. When I use silence, I think I mentioned in this class before when I used to do domestic violence and family violence counseling in groups. And when I had a male victim, this time I learned to use that silence to kind of go through my own biased thinking. Am I being biased towards this individual because he's a male? And he's portraying himself as a victim, which in that thought process, you could hear the bias. And so it allowed me to kind of reset myself and learn how to become less biased to the idea that men can be victimized as well. So going back to that example. It also allows you to think about your paraphrasing, which we're going to get into next in our next topic. How am I framing this? What is the client telling me? What are the key things that I need to make sure that that I relate back to the client that I understand? Um, Sometimes for silence can just mark a natural end to a discussion or to some material that the client has brought. Okay. As and this is where we use what's called purposeful client silence. You'll notice, for example, at the end of each of these classes, I'll ask, does anybody have any comments, questions? You can unmute yourself, you could put it in the chat, you could raise your hand, and then we have a moment of silence. Okay. After, I know I'm not waiting the full counseling amount of time. After 4 or 5 seconds, I then say, okay, well, since no one has any questions, it's time to end the class. It's a natural end. Instead of saying, well, guys, it's 6:30, go to 6:15, 5:30. Yeah, we're over time. We're 6:15. Let's get out of here. See you later. Have a good day. So, but I think we go to 6:30. So don't think that. So that's kind of how we naturally end a lot of our classes, right? And the same thing goes when you're looking at ending a group session or something, and you kind of say, "Hey, is anybody have any comments about today?" It can also be a transition point when you're doing a topic change. Does anybody have anything else to say about what we learned in this section? And you do a natural pause and you just let that silence be. And then it gives a nice transition into the next topic. And it gives people that mental break. Okay, I'm letting this information go. And now I'm ready to go into the next process. Now, benefits to client. Okay, and this will wrap this section up. Making connections. Silence gives clients time to connect, to find words, images, or feelings they are looking for. Okay. And a lot of times this is important because when we look at research on memory, memories are not exact photographs of what actually happened at an event. And I'll bring up an example because we've now had generations raised on everything in their life being videotaped on phones or on devices. And so we can actually look at a person's 10th birthday and then ask them at the age of 30 what they remember about their 10th birthday. and compare the two images, right? The images that are created, or the scenarios or the situations that are created. And what we find by example, manipulating mood, okay? So let's say we do a manipulation where we make someone in a melancholy or a low mood or a sad mood, okay? We find that they tend to recall family members who were there that actually were not there, that tended to be moody, grumpy, sad. They remember their birthday as just kind of this, it was kind of boring and didn't get many gifts. And they create kind of this gray picture. But then when we do a manipulation where we put them in a good mood, we do some type of bogus personality test that says, hey, you should be in a good mood, whatever it may be. Well, then we find that people may have not been there, that they had many happy memories with. It was one of their best birthdays that they've ever had. And there were lots of gifts, and the cake was excellent that year. And so my point being is that memories are congruent with the emotional state that we're in today. Okay. And so, what silence allows a client to do when they're in that counseling setting, which can be anxiety provoking, it can be emotional provoking, is it allows them to calm themselves, come to a regulated emotional state, and really kind of try and get more of an authentic feelings and words and images that may better represent that experience they went through than being more congruent with the state they're in during that group session. Okay. It may be the first time in many of your clients' lives that they are putting names to feelings. Okay, you know, in this goes back to when I talked at the beginning of the semester about how many clients stop going to the counselor after the first or second session. And if you remember, we went back and we interviewed them, and they said that, you know, because it was the first time someone was there and they just listened to me, unbiased, and just let me talk. That was the first time that I was ever allowed to do that, and that relieved my symptoms. In this similar situation, when you allow a client to actually feel without telling them how they should feel, but you allow that silence to allow them to absorb all of that, then we see that they're actually going to put names to feelings themselves for the first time, and not because this is what mom said they should feel like, or their spouse should feel like, or what the counselor says they should be feeling right now. They're actually labeling their own emotions and putting words to it. While it may be familiar with the physical sensations that emotions brings, such as knots in the stomach and tightness in the chest, it can naturally take to find the words to describe this. And this is the whole point, is really understanding. Most people understand the sensations of emotions and feelings, but they've never had the opportunity to put their own label to it. Okay. So what other benefits do we have? Nurturing feelings. Silence can provide a space where feelings can be nurtured and allowed to develop. It's through processing their material that clients move from rigidity to understanding that things are fluid and organic. Okay. And if you want to give an example of this, is that when we think of rigidity and we think of it in the guise of addiction, okay, a person has an emotional trigger to use a substance. Their thought process is rigid. I have this feeling I have to use, and that's the only way that will relieve that emotion and that fixed thinking, emotion, substance use, relief is a very rigid and hard thing to break. Okay. But when you allow them to process the emotional trigger that they're feeling and allow it grow organically and let it flow and realize that you could take that emotion in several different directions, not just this very fit I can't talk all this, a fixed pattern of thought. Okay. And that's the idea behind rigidity versus fluidity. All right. Fully engaging in emotions. I think we've kind of worked through this. Clients may cry and feel the pain, which previously was suppressed. And I do want to stop here and talk about crying for a minute, because one of our most natural responses, especially if you're a parent, or you have raised your siblings or the like, is or your yeah, is that um, when you see someone crying, you instantly want to try and relieve their pain. You want to comfort them. You get out the tissue box. You go, it's okay. It's okay. Um, you'll be all right. Um, and we can see a lot of gender differences in this, okay, where parents and people in society will try and get that little boy to stop crying right away. That's not allowed. Knock it off. Stop. For women, it's, oh, you're being emotional. Come on, get through it. Now, I'm making a generalization, but in research, we find that these two gender issues are still very prevalent today. But I just want to bring that up because what I want you all to practice is presence, not intervention. Okay. Because crying can be a very, very, very powerful tool in your counseling arsenal. And what I would encourage you to do is, yes, have a box of napkins. Um, and if crying, offer the napkin, be there in a kind, helpful way. Don't do any of the patting on the back or anything like that, but just allow them to have that emotion and be there and encourage it. Okay. Especially in the group setting, because in the group setting, you're actually going to see your group members kind of start to surround that individual and be empathetic towards them. And that's really good in a group setting. Okay. In the individual setting, I will tell you that I've had, in a 60-minute session, I've had some clients who cried for 30 minutes of it because they just needed to feel. And there was nowhere else they could feel that emotion except in a safe place. And that's really what you want to create, is a safe place where a person can feel the full range of emotions. And pain is one of those emotions that bring our clients to us. Addiction doesn't occur out of happiness. Depression, anxiety, trauma, they don't occur because everybody had a happy thing. But the thing that is encouraged for people who go through trauma and addiction is to suppress that pain. Don't feel that pain. And this is one way that you can say, no, we're going to feel it. It's important to feel it. Feel the body, feel that tears, feel all of those things. Okay. Um, and so that's another great way to use silence, especially with crying. Okay. All right. Body language, though, with silence is important because even in silence, we still are making some type of communication. We probably heard this a million times that 90% of communication is nonverbal. It's not verbal. So, when using silence, remember some of these main tips. We speak about different tones of voice, both written and spoken language, but silence has a different tone as well when it's used effectively. Silence as a counseling is not about just physical presence, yet quiet. So when I say that you're creating this safe place for someone to think, you still want to know, have your client know that you're there, that you're present without saying, hey, it's okay, that everything's be fine, but just allowing them to process. It does require the full presence with the client within that silence. In other words, that psychological contract must remain in place at all times, that they're there to work on their issue. You're there as a guide, as a facilitator to allow that to occur, and that needs to stay in place. Maintaining this presence and this connection can allow a therapist to pick up the client's feelings by observing their body language. And this is another tool that you can use in your kit. Is silence is also a great way to understand where the client is in their comfort level and how they adjust their body language, let you know where they are in the counseling process. Okay. All right. I just want to end with this because all of this is based on the idea of empathy. Empathy, as Carl Rogers put, is the ability to perceive the internal frame of reference of another with accuracy and with emotional components and meanings which pertain thereto as if one were the person, but without ever losing the as if conditions. Okay. And when we think about silence, when we think about these things that we're doing, remember it's that empathetic drive that we're trying to develop and trying that ability to try and completely understand where an individual is coming from and what they're experiencing, because that's the only way as helpers that we can help move people forward. Okay. All right. I'll give 5 seconds of silence before we move on to another topic. No, I'm going to ask, does anybody have any questions about the use of silence? I know this has been a long process and we've taken up 2 classes on it, but it is something that is really new to a lot of counselors and a lot of group facilitators. And it's something that takes a while to get comfortable with. Is there any questions, comments on the issue of silence? You can unmute yourself. You can put it in the chat. You can raise your
How
hand.
long how long can a silence last in a session? Well, is there a limit?
So kind of the rule of thumb, and that's a really good question. One is if a person has experienced crying, right, and that emotional feeling of internalization, my recommendation is you let it go as long as it needs to. Um, but so it's a wonderful question. And it's basically anytime you ask a question, um, what we do with a lot of new counselors in supervision is we say, ask a question and in your head, count for 20 seconds. Doing the one, not one, two, three, four, doing one 100, two 100, three 100, four 100. And then after 20 seconds of silence, then kind of move on. Okay. Um, and so there's this 20-second rule, but the other part of it is also you want to use what you're reading off your client. Are they just going off to another world? Are you losing them? Are they becoming disinterested? And then you might want to intervene a little bit early. So there's a 20-second rule, but then there's also this, you need to be attending to your clients to see Oh, this is getting uncomfortable. I'm going to start thinking about what I'm doing after group. Does that make sense?
It does, because I come across some clients that are just completely just like silent. And when you do try to ask them a question, they just look at you like, and then I say, do you get what I'm talking about? Or, do you understand the question? Most of the time, like especially in group settings, it's very difficult to get clients to be interactive with you. So I kind of like give them a long pause, not a long, but some pause in that time to where I can start again. So now I can use this 20-second one.
Yeah. Yeah, give that a try.
Yeah,
See
yeah.
if it improves. If not, then there might be something else you can adjust to kind of get them more engaged.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Thanks for the question. Any other questions or comments? Okay. All right. Well, let's move on to paraphrasing. Okay. So, one of the main tools that we often use in counseling to make sure clients understand that we're actually listening to them is paraphrasing. Because it gives you the opportunity to say, I'm listening to you, and it gives the client the opportunity to correct or to add to what you're expressing to them. And so it gives you the chance to make sure your thoughts are accurate, but it empowers your client to say, you know what, that's not what I meant, that's not what I was saying, or oh, I forgot to include this. So it gives them their own power over their own narrative. So it has a dual power. Okay. So let's talk about this just a little bit more. Again, this is when we're reflecting back the key points of a client's story. Okay. It is sometimes described as holding a mirror to the client so that they can hear the words repeated back to them. Okay. And just like I said before, this has about three functions. It lets the clients know that you're paying attention and that you're hearing them. Again, when we go back to the conversations we just had, many people are not heard, they're told. Okay. And a lot of times we don't listen to listen, we listen to respond. And that's what clients are used to. They're just waiting for you to go in and say, well, this is what I think. You should go do this. Go on. Good luck. Goodbye. And a lot of times, this may be the first time where someone says, so if I heard you right, this is what I heard you said. And you can correct me if I'm wrong. But what you said is ABC. Am I right or am I wrong? And what you tell me what was that correct? Okay. The client can be sure that you have listened and gives them the opportunity to correct and add in information. It also gives the opportunity for the client to hear the power of their own words. Okay. And again, a lot of times when we say something, we're expecting an emotional reaction out of another person, right? So again, when we look at a lot of individuals who've gone through trauma or even addiction and whatnot, they haven't been heard. They've gone to doctors and say, I need this help. They've gone to in trauma or family violence, they've gone to law enforcement, they've gone to social services, and they feel like they're not being heard. So a lot of times they will tell a story in a way to try and make some impact on another person. Okay. And what this allows them to do is actually take ownership of that. And so for you to reflect that back and say, this is what I heard you tell me, it allows them to hear the words that they're actually expressing, or hopefully expressing if we heard them correctly. And again, it gives them the opportunity to go, you know what? That's not how I meant to say that, or that's not what I was thinking. Let me try to rethink of that. Or sometimes they may say, that's exactly what I was trying to say. I've said it a million times and no one will listen. And so think about that and think about the individuals that we're helping, because a lot of times they've been in and out of systems. They've had some people who have genuinely cared about them, but may not have provided the proper amount of space or healing. They may have been, and a lot of times they've just been ignored or shoved to the side or whatnot. So, or been think to that maybe they were the perpetrator, they're the cause of everything, that they should just go and just be away, right? Which is another whole different class that we should discuss in. But so this is the three functions of it, though. Okay. Whoa. Okay. So the first part of paraphrasing I want to talk about is something called reflecting. Okay. Reflecting is showing client that you have heard not only what is being said, but also what's feelings and emotions the client is experiencing when sharing their story with you. So reflecting is, so you ask a client a question, okay? And they say it in a very emotional, painful way. Um, and what you want to do is reflect it back in that same way and say something like, geez, so what I just heard you say, and again, I always use this, you can use whatever term you want. Uh, so what I heard you say, and correct me if I'm wrong, is when you went there and X and Y, Z happened, that was very painful for you to go through, especially when this person did that and going on with kind of that emotional tone. Now, if someone says something very excitedly and maybe they're getting worked up about it, you reflect that back. You go, geez, tell me if I'm wrong, but this is what you just told me, that X, Y, and Z, da 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 da. And am I right on that? Is that what you experienced? And let's talk about that some more. And notice that through that, so you begin with that excitement and then you bring the tone down, because what you want to do is not keep them at that heightened range. Remember at the beginning of the semester when we talked about heightened emotions are not the best at thought processing. So you start reflecting back in that high tone when they're excited and whatnot, but then you bring it back down. So let's talk about that for a minute, and let's reflect on that some more, because that was important. Did I get that right, what you just told me? Okay. And this is what this second bullet point, and why there's music sheet here, is counselors speak as the music behind the words. So you're reflecting back to them not only what they said, but kind of in that same emotional tone. But remember, in the end, just like a symphony, you want to bring them back to that mid-level of emotion. Okay. Okay, and I don't know why this is rapport. I'm trying to think about this. Is skill of reflecting. It's part of rapport building and whatnot. The skill is used to reflect key points about a client's story, holding up a mirror. I think this is just a repeat thing. So reflecting. So what does it do? It's holding up that mirror, repeating what the client says. You might reflect back whole sentences, or you might select a few words. This person often refers to reflection as the lost skill. And I agree with the person on the slide, is because it's often something that is lost. Because as I mentioned, we need to learn to listen, then respond. Because what a lot of times we try to do is we try to build an answer as the client is speaking instead of listening to hear what the client is saying. We're looking to match tones, as I just said. For example, they may hunch the shoulder over and whatnot. Maxine, I don't think the screen is frozen. Is the screen frozen for anyone else?
Yeah, my screen on where you're presenting is frozen. I can see you on the gallery part. It's just showing that you're talking, but to my left side where you're sharing the screen is
Well, let's stop sharing and then we'll share it again real quick. Let's try that. Just to give it a try. And we'll share again. Did that help, Maxine? Is it coming up with a reflecting on the left and then about 1, 2, 3, 6 bullet points?
no, mine's is still frozen. Maybe
I think it might just be hers because it seems like everything's popping up and running on my end.
All right, thank you.
okay. I'm gonna log off and then I'm gonna log back in.
Okay, Maxine. All right, thank you for letting me know it's not everyone. Okay, thank you, Lucia. All right. All right, well, we'll go on and we'll catch Maxine up a little bit later. When we use skill of reflection, we're looking to match the tone and feelings like we were just talking about. For example, we might say, I was so scared, I didn't know what to do with her shoulders. And you might want to kind of mimic that similarly to them and mirror that body language. Now, I do want to encourage you to be careful with the idea of mirroring body language because especially when you're trying to tell a client something with a heightened emotion, they might feel that as a threat. And so I would be very careful with when you're dealing with a heightened emotion where there might be feelings of aggression or feelings of hypervigilance. You want matching or mirroring body language should be very subtle. Okay. Now, in very emotional states, lower emotional states such as sadness, matching the body language a little bit closer is a little bit more helpful for them to recognize what they're feeling. So be careful with the body language matching because it can create some resilience and hypervigilance and some resistance, especially if it's that hyper, more aggressive type of story that the client is trying to tell. Okay. All right. So those ideas that we went through, rapport building, silence, and reflecting are three basic core skills. Oh, Gloria, you have your hand up.
Yeah, so what if the client like so they're sharing they're sharing, the experience, but you see them like kind of reliving it and that and they're getting really like anxious and just like where would you like what would be a good point to like just like okay, like recognize they're getting like really worked up about this and to like kind of like slow them down and bring them back down. I hope that makes sense.
No, Glory, that actually makes really good sense, and you'll find this a lot, especially dealing with individuals who've been through a lot of trauma and they're either reliving or expressing their trauma experience. And one important thing is, remember when we were talking about paying attention to body language and those types of things? One good skill that I would encourage you to do is when a person has that enlightened moment. So, like when Gloria is stating, and I know this sounds strange to call this enlightening, when a person starts going from telling the story to getting very hyped up and stuff like this, it's important to try and find this natural breaking point where you can say, Hey, Joe. Hey, I just noticed, and I want to reflect on this really quick before you go on with your story. Did you notice what happened just right now? Did you notice how your feelings were going from when you started to the story to where they are right now? Are you feeling that? Are you experiencing that? And then give that silence moment. This is a perfect time for that 20 seconds of silence. Okay. And then just going on and saying, okay, I wanted you to feel that for a minute. Do you feel like you can go on? Okay. Because Glory, you're absolutely right. You don't want to escalate feelings into a trauma response. Okay. So you want to notice when a client is really starting to trigger, and you want to stop them kind of there and just say, hey, wait a moment. Hey, I just noticed something, and make it a positive thing. Don't say, oh my gosh, I see you going out of control. Oh no, here we go. No, go in there and say, I just noticed something. And I want us to talk about this right now, if you don't mind, and then we'll return to your story. But I just saw this in you. I saw this change when you were talking about X, Y, and Z, and then you started to feel something. I noticed some feelings going on there. Can you tell me about what you were experiencing when you were talking about that? And let that be. But does that make sense? What I'm saying in that perspective? Because it's an excellent
Yeah, that does. That really does. And, and just how you said, like, not to be like, oh my gosh, you're getting out of hand or you're getting out of control, but turning it around, like, I acknowledge you and thank you for sharing that. And, and yeah, just working with the individual where they're at in that moment and helping them express and actually identify like what they're physically feeling. So.
Mhm. Excellent. Right. Thank you for that question. It was a really good question. Okay. So let's talk about let's see. Let's talk about focusing, and I think something I need to learn. Focusing. So these skills that we're going into are important, but want you to keep in mind those three as ones that you continually develop. So rapport building, silence, and reflecting are three things that I want you to kind of continually be practicing and working on. And then these other skills that we're talking about now are also additional kind of in your tool bag type of thing. So we have the three broad ones, and then these kind of fit under those three. Okay. So focusing is a useful skill to clients bring lots of issues to a session by asking the client which issues is most pressing. The counselor and the clients have a clear understanding of what's being worked with. Usually when major issues that focus of the work other. Okay, so focusing is a skill when your client comes in and you go, how was your week? And they start saying, oh, I lost my child care. I was late to work. The boss wrote me up. My paycheck wasn't enough. My partner, blah, blah, blah. My parents, la, la, la. I relapsed. I slept 2 days in a row, all of these other things. Okay. And focusing is a skill of bringing down that list and saying, let's focus on the three major issues that are going on, or the four major issues. Now, the skill behind this is you want to focus on those issues that are triggering here in the moment. Okay. And I'll tell you some research here in just a minute to kind of indicate this. So, for example, when your client is giving you this long list and they're mentioning mom, and mom is part of their trauma past, and they're mentioning their partner who they've had a lot of history of maybe domestic violence or something like this. They're mentioning the kids, that's a current issue. They're mentioning the shortage of paycheck. That's a current issue. And they're mentioning being late to work. Those are all very current issues, okay? Um, it's important to take those issues and try to bring the client to focus on those very current issues, okay? And this is really why, from a research perspective, is that we have found over the last couple decades that the traditional counseling, where you take the person back, clear back into their childhood, and you try to dig up the roots of their problem, of their addiction or their trauma, or you bring them back to when they were traumatized as a child to figure out what is causing we're finding that that really is not effective in helping a person today. Okay. It may be something that you can explore later down the line, something like that. But really, what we're finding is when we talk to clients about how they're experiencing their symptoms here and now, today, not the roots of them, not the causes of them, but how they're experiencing them today and how they can relieve them in the here and now, then we find that treatment is actually a lot more effective than digging up the past and trying to find the roots of, trauma or addiction or anything like that. So when you have a client with all of these issues, try to encourage them to focus on those things that are connected to the here and now. What's going to make them be successful tomorrow or build success tomorrow? Not necessarily maybe the phone call from mom, maybe not the issues that are going on with dad, but maybe the issues, like I said, with the job, the paycheck, and the kids. Okay. And that's really the art of focusing, because sometimes clients will want to come in and they'll want to, and I'm going to say this very purposely, they want to divert the topic. They don't want to talk about issues today because it's safer for them to talk about those issues that they've had with mom, those issues they had with past trauma, those issues, because they're in the distant past. They're back there. And focusing on the here and now about survival, about living, that's a much more difficult topic to talk about. Okay. So when clients are overwhelmed, they'll have this natural want to go and explore something that they feel is a little bit more safer than a little bit more difficult. Okay. So kind of keep that in mind when you have clients who come in with a huge number of things that they need to talk about.
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
So, I know that that sounds like important for I guess, if they're doing like maybe if we're doing like peer support or like individual like one-on-one counseling session just for them to come in that day for like an hour or something like that. But like when would that conversation happen? Because like from like some of the things that I've experienced, like there's this group, they're not group, but there's this program called Mending Broken Hearts, and it was like designed to for individuals to recognize what happened with intergenerational trauma and how that has affected like Native American communities and then in present day. And so there's a and you can do it like in group settings too, but there's like an exercise where they have to, well, not have to, but you can pick an individual, let's say it's mom, and then you do a timeline from your earliest memory of grief with this person, and then you list this timeline from that earliest memory moving forward with this person, but then you also list the positive things, with this individual. And so then you go through like this process with like writing the this letter and identifying these areas. But yeah, so I guess when would be a good time to reflect on that, or would that be more like a higher level of care?
Well, yeah. So first of all, thank you. I need to rewind a little bit because I was talking more on the individual level when an individual comes in. Focusing, and then I'll come back to your question too. Focusing in groups. Let me rewind for just a second. Focusing in groups, when your group members come in and your group have a lot of things they want to talk about, okay? And there's just a lot of things that are going on with your group. In the group setting, what I would encourage you to do is say, okay, it sounds like we have a lot of things to talk about. Let's agree on 3 important things that we need to get to as a group. Okay. And so that's a group setting. So individual setting, it's kind of negotiating with the client. In the group setting. Again, you want to try and encourage the group to focus on 3 current things that are going on, versus things that have happened in the past and people will bring up the past. So the group setting is a little bit different than the individual setting. So thank you for having me rewind on that. Back to your question though, is in this situation that you're describing, in especially dealing with different traumas, intergenerational trauma and stuff like that, it's very common to have exercises where you do have your clients go back to their past and feel those emotions and think about those experiences. Okay. When you would use a technique like focusing in this situation is when the experience of thinking about the parent or the grandparent and stuff, you notice the individual becoming very overwhelmed and they're becoming very emotional and thinking about, oh, geez, and they're starting to think about whole bunches of different things that went on with grandma or grandpa or the like. And that's when focusing skills come into play, as you can say, hey, I'm noticing that you're feeling a lot of things right now. Okay. What of those memories, what of those things that you have identified? Let's identify 3 of those things that are really making you feel right now, right here, what you're feeling. Okay, and let's talk about those 3 things. And then that again brings them back to today and about how it's making them feel today, realizing that it is that memory that is the trigger. Okay. And so that is when focusing would be used kind of in that kind of setting. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that does. That makes a lot of sense.
Okay,
Mm-hmm.
good.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And it's an interesting exercise too. So that's really good. I like how it's both positive and trauma filling. So that's good. Anyways, just wanted to state that. All right. Any other questions on focusing or comments? All right. So
So,
oh,
let me just,
no, go ahead, Maxine.
no, I'll just wait. Just go ahead.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Um, no, I was gonna ask, it's okay to bring them back to the main reasons why they're there, right? Because I've noticed that some clients, they tend to go off track, like they say one thing and then another thing, but they're focusing more of the other thing that's not pertaining to why that person came in the first place. Like, let's say, like, for example, being in sobriety, recovery, substance abuse, but instead now it's leading on to family issues and it's leading to job. And so to get it back to the attention of why the client is there for treatment, is it okay, or do I just, we talked about it for a while here, but I couldn't see my screen really good. um, getting that tension back to
Yeah.
why.
And Maxine, that's another good example, like we were talking about with the trauma, right? Where a person is starting to kind of have that experience and sometimes, and this is an example of it, they might veer off in a totally different direction, right? Than the one that was uncomfortable for them. Um, and so, yes, this is another good time that you would want to use focusing. And it's kind of a different type of focusing. It's kind of bringing them back to the zone that you need them to be in. Okay. Because again, and this is a wonderful example. One of the defense mechanisms we talked about in the first of the semester was things like projection, right? Or denial, or what's the other one? Anyways, where we kind of put this thing over there, and we're going to talk about these things because these things over here, I can project what I'm going through onto them because they're a safe object to do that on. Going down this route is kind of scary because what you're asking me to do in a lot of these situations is for you to take responsibility for example, your sobriety. You're asking them to take responsibility for their issues and what they're going through, and you're asking them to process that. But it's much safer if I say, I do this because these people act this way. This is called projection. Okay. Because the world is rotten to me, because my parents were these kind of people, because I was in these kind of relationships. All of this is a form of projection. And we use projection because it feels better to us, because it's really uncomfortable for us to really nail down on our issues. So in this type of focusing, if we want to use this term in Maxine's situation, is nudging them back, okay, and saying, okay, I know that you've mentioned your family, your parents, and those in the past, but let's go back to the here and now. Let's be right here because we can't do anything about them. The only thing we can do something about is what we're talking about here and now. Does that make sense, Maxine?
Yes, it does make sense. Thank you. Kind
And
of
it's,
like an idea of it now. So.
yeah, and thank you for that question. Okay, let's get through clarifying because then on Wednesday, we're going to go through questions, which are always interesting topic. So clarifying, sometimes clients give a lot of information all at once that make perfect sense to them, but can be confusing to the counselor to understand. Clarifying is a skill that uses questions to help counselors get better at understanding the client's story. While it may feel difficult to interrupt a client's, I'm reading right now, interrupt client's story to clarify their meaning, it demonstrates that you really want to understand fully. It is also much easier to clarify at times than to let the client continue and then to end up not understanding or even misunderstanding their story. Okay, so clarifying is that situation where you have to purposely interrupt a client, but you're not interrupting them to stop them, or to even if we want to redirect them or focus them. This is when we're interrupting the client because their story is just has become too disjointed. Okay. And you're trying to understand and make the story coherent with what they're saying. Okay. Um, and this often happens when you have a lot of trauma that has happened in a person's life. Okay. So, for example, when I worked with victims of intimate violence and domestic violence, and it was an individual who'd been in and out of horrible relationships and violent relationships, it wasn't uncommon for all of those relationships to kind of start melding together. Okay. And they might be talking about their first experience with a partner, and that first person then melds into their current relationship, and then they might bounce back to the middle of a relationship, and they might be going from relationship to relationship and thinking that it's one complete coherent story. Okay. And this is where, again, when you start noticing these shifts in time variables, that you're not going from beginning to end, that you kind of want to stop and say, okay, I don't mean to interrupt, but I do have a question, because we were talking about your first relationship. Um, and it seems like you've now talking about your current relationship with um, John Doe. And I want to, can you tell me the connection between those two things? Okay. And what this does is clarifying allows the client to kind of go into their head and go, oh my gosh, this all of these relationships have become one huge nightmare for me, for one. And then they can, that allows them then to disentangle all of these things. Okay. But again, the other part of it is it goes, wow, this counselor is actually really listening to me and wants to know my story and wants to understand it. Okay. So clarifying is an important skill to develop when you notice that stories start not meeting a timeline, when emotional stories start becoming unconnected. Okay. I once had a client who at the beginning of the session told me about their birthday and how wonderful it was. And then by the end of well, actually, it was about midway through the session, the client started telling me how horrible that birthday was. And we had to go through a clarifying moment. Okay. Going back to the question about the intergenerational trauma, clarifying is another skill when you start building those timelines, right? With the relatives and noticing that there's times where there's things that are incoherent with each other, that this would be a good skill to sit in and say, well, hold on. I'm misunderstanding. I don't know where we went off track, or maybe it's just me, maybe I'm not hearing you right, but is this what you mean by what's going on here? And I know I'm speaking abstractly, but that's kind of where the skill of clarifying comes in. And it's an important one as a sub skill. Again, if you think about clarifying is a form of reflection that includes a question to kind of say, all right, this is what you're telling me, but this isn't making much sense, or this, can you explain this more? And those types of things. So again, this is that listening skill and understanding a client's story. And when that client's story starts to not make sense to you, this is when you need to start asking clarifying questions. Okay. Which will lead us to our topic for Wednesday, which is asking questions. So I'm going to stop sharing here and I'll stop our recording. Maybe.